Thanks for joining us on this panel. This is a panel organized by the ONF, the Open Networking Foundation, and this panel is dedicated to 5G Open RAN. And we're going to discuss today with a number of prominent players in that new and exciting value chain, how Open RAN is contributing to the radio access ecosystem in 5G, and what are the different flavors of Open RAN and where we are in terms of Open RAN maturity for deployment for 5G. So I have today with me four participants, four panelists. Bejoy is joining us from Mavenir. Bejoy Pankajakshan, sorry if I mispronounce your name, is EVP and Chief Strategy Officer at Mavenir. We also have Sandro Tavares. Sandro Tavares is the head of mobile networks marketing at Nokia. We're joined as well by Steve Papa, who is Chief Executive Officer at Parallel Wireless. And at last, we have Oguz Sunay, who is the Vice President of Research and Development at the Open Networking Foundation. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
So, as we discussed, we're going to start not by a panel, but we're going to start by a quick presentation from each of the panelists here on their perspective on Open RAN and what their company is doing to promote Open RAN. And we will start with Bejoy from Mavenir. So Bejoy, if you could start by a short 5 minutes introduction into Mavenir's perspective on Open RAN, please.
Sure. Let me share the screen. Hi. Hello, I'm Bejoy Pankajakshan, Chief Strategy Officer for Mavenir. First up, thanks to ONF for inviting Mavenir to this Open RAN panel. A quick intro to Mavenir. We are the industry's only end-to-end open architecture-based cloud-native software provider. Currently, we support more than 250 customers in over 140 countries, more than 3 billion mobile subscribers are served in Mavenir products. We deployed in multiple tier 1 operators globally on very large scale as well. Today, Mavenir is around 4,000 employees, but a significant portion of these employees are in R&D. We gained market leadership in the transition from 3G networks to 4G, voice over LTE, which was a software revolution for the core network. And the industry is now looking at a similar disruption on the radio side, which of course is the most expensive part of the operator network. Mavenir has invested in Open RAN for 5 years now, starting with the XRAN project prior to ORAN itself being created. We're also very active in TIP and other Open RAN initiatives. There's great momentum now for Mavenir and Open RAN. We've got multiple live deployments. We've tested rigorously in brownfield deployments. For example, Vodafone India, where we batted against actual site KPIs that had to match or exceed the incumbent radio vendor. Mavenir has also partnered with few Open RAN system integrator players such as Goodman, GGT, and together we bring a vast experience in terms of cell site construction and drive test to be able to fulfill the system integrator role for Open RAN deployments. Now we'll spend some time to talk about the Open RAN network evolution options that Mavenir is working on. One of the main functions is when we look at Open RAN evolutions today, the telco cloud market is expected to have explosive growth in terms of the amount of revenue that's generated by workloads, telco workloads running in public hybrid clouds. And this is driven by migration of these workloads to the public cloud, as well as hybrid cloud deployments. We're also seeing public cloud providers acquiring telco players. So, for example, Microsoft's recent acquisition of a firm that Metaswitch. So in line with that multi-cloud strategy, RAN will also evolve to support public and hybrid cloud deployments. We're also evaluating alternative technology for RAN to capture the wider ecosystem that includes GPUs and lowers the solution cost. The objective here is to support more cells per user and is primed for LDC, supporting density and capacity sites. There's also a similar consideration for edge computing and private network deployments, especially when doing NIC offload of user-plane functions. A good example would be edge deployment for video analytics, where the radio, the packet core, and the edge analytics functions can be offloaded to GPUs. A third area is where a major usage of telco AI is to manage and optimize and maintain infrastructure. So in that regard, one part of Mavenir's AI business unit is focused on the near real-time and the non-real-time RIC to optimize the L1, L2 scheduler algorithms via XApps and RApps. The radio scheduler is always a key vendor differentiator, and our focus here is on AI ML-based scheduler to support beamforming, prediction for channel state, UE movement, and particularly for slicing at the DU, including slice management and SLA management for the slices. A fifth area is on low-cost, low-power COTS, with the industry expecting the total number of radio sites with multiple frequency bands will increase significantly over the next few years. We see the need to work further on power optimization with x86 solutions. Despite 5G energy consumption per unit being lower than 4G, the site total power consumption is higher, and this can create challenges for existing battery capacity and power distribution, and even possibly increase the CapEx OpEx per site when we need to retrofit these current sites to accommodate the higher power requirements. So another area of Open RAN evolution is the use of technologies that could help to manage this, such as AI-based power grid and energy savings features. Finally, while the 3GPP standards have adopted services-based architecture for the 5G core, there's more work required to extend SPA standardization to RAN and 3GPP and O-RAN bodies. So this is another area of Open RAN evolution which Mavenir is working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Bejoy. We're going to pass the screen to Sandro from Nokia. And while he's getting set up, I'm just going to remind everyone who's listening to that podcast, or rather that's recording, that there is also a full presentation from each of the participants in this panel that goes into a lot more detail in their product offering, and that these presentations are recorded and can be accessed through the ONF website. Sandro, up to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thanks for having us joining this panel. So I'd like to start by actually contextualizing a little bit of the way that Nokia sees Open RAN playing in the grand scheme of things. First thing to keep in mind is what we see as the evolution path for Open RAN in the market, right? And we do expect that by 2024, 2025, 30% of the overall radio access networks market will be based on Cloud RAN and or Open RAN. So this is a pretty significant step compared to where we are now. And another important point to keep in mind is really when I talk about Cloud RAN and Open RAN, to really clarify how these topics, they interrelate, but also how they are different, right? And the way we do that at Nokia is kind of position these in different axes, right? So we say that Cloud RAN actually will help build vertical flexibility on the network, meaning that you can mix and match building blocks from different vendors on the infrastructure layer. So you can have data center, hardware, OpenStack, then the virtualized DUs, CUs, and the management orchestration is on the cloud stack on a vertical way. And another thing that is important to keep in mind is that not necessarily all Cloud RAN implementation is an Open RAN implementation, right? You can have Cloud RAN running with proprietary interfaces. It's still, we don't consider that as an Open RAN implementation. Then on top of that, we add what we call the horizontal flexibility of the network, which is then really what Open RAN will bring to the picture, where you actually implement open standardized interfaces. And the most prominent work on this domain coming from the O-RAN Alliance between the different building blocks of the RAN architecture. So in the example here on the screen, so you have an open mid hole between the CU and DU, and then the open front hole. between the DU and the RU. So they are in the same way that also Cloud RAN not necessarily means Open RAN. It is also expected that you could have Open RAN being implemented with elements that are not necessarily cloud-based. This is not going to be the norm, of course, but as our concept of Open RAN is firmly anchored on the definition and implementation of the standardized interfaces between the different building blocks of the radio access network, that kind of gives us and our customers the flexibility to decide where and how they are going to implement it following a cloud-based approach or not. That said, looking to the longer term, we do believe that these are going to work very much together. So a little bit of highlights of what we see as drivers and challenges, right? So as I pointed out, we firmly believe that you define Open RAN and Open RAN case by the existence and deployment of open interfaces between the different building blocks of the radio access network. Without that, it can be an experiment towards an open environment, but you're not guaranteeing the full benefits of openness that will come with the open interface, and that's why we push that so heavily. Looking to the drivers, of course, like a hope to decrease CapEx by increasing competition among vendors. This is clear, right? There's still, for us, some question marks on how that will play out. We don't have like firm data on that yet. It's surely a hope that we're going to get to reduce its costs. And it's a fair assumption, right? But then the main drivers that we see is, of course, like the flexibility in supplier selection due to the open interfaces, and also, let's say, an added security to the telecom supply chain, especially in a scenario where not all vendors are considered as acceptable in all countries. So by having a wider array of options and actually more companies innovating, we get a more diverse ecosystem and a stronger telecom supply chain. There are challenges, of course, that come with such a transformation. And of course, the industry is working together to overcome those challenges. But of course, like how do you reintegrate the BTS and how do you guarantee that functionalities, features are working between different vendors on top of these open interfaces? This is a challenge that needs to be overcome. But I mean, we have no reasons to believe that they would not be overcome. And very quickly on our position, right? So Nokia took a pretty firm stance on supporting Open RAN and Cloud RAN. I mean, we've been doing Cloud RAN for a while, and we're really focusing into getting and helping our customers transition to an Open RAN environment without a strong or a severe disruption of the network that they have now. So we do that by building the standard interfaces on top of our solutions, giving them the option of choosing a cloud-based implementation or not, but really also by collaborating in this open environment and making sure that we utilize our position as an incumbent to actually power and help the whole ecosystem grow together, right? So bringing additional weight, not that that wasn't weight, it was already a pretty strong initiative, but bringing additional weight to basically help the market take the decision to go open. With that's my story for today.
Thank you, Sandro. We're now going to move to Steve Papa, CEO of Parallel Wireless. Steve, whenever you are ready. Go ahead.
Great. So I started my career in putting the first Intel chips in the data center in the early 90s. And I've lived through this journey of going from vertically integrated companies to horizontal platforms that are open. And it's a journey. It doesn't happen in one step. I remember as a product manager, I released NCR Unix MPRAS 2.0 in 1995. I remember releasing 4 gigs of RAM was $4 million in 1995. But because of openness, by 2000, that was probably $15,000, right? So that's how remarkable it can be when you open things up. Basically, innovation happens faster, right? That's the key. An open interface isn't an end, isn't the end goal. The end goal is to have faster innovation in the system. And these interfaces will be moving around a lot over the course of this journey. Some of the things that people are fighting to make open right now are going to become commodities, and no one's going to care about it. Go back to the early 90s, people cared a lot about open interfaces for spelling checkers. At some point, they didn't care. But if you want a great example of what it means to have slow innovation, when something's vertically integrated, think about your car and the navigation interface that comes from the automobile vendor. Compare that with your smartphone. And when I look at the cellular network, when I look at, in particular, 5G, to me, that's the radios, right? When I look at the biggest content of 5G, really the spend and what makes it 5G is the radio. And by those being proprietary, the number of innovators that can drive change there, it feels as if we were stuck in our cars without being able to use our smartphones to navigate, okay? So that, to me, is what Open RAN is all about. And we could talk, in great detail about all the different, changes that happen in the data center, but it was really about a journey of innovation, okay? At Parallel Wireless, we're providing all Gs as software. And the idea is we believe Open RAN is going to start out in, I'd say, the less critical parts of the network. In the same way Intel servers started out in rural Nebraska Walmarts and retailers in the Philippines, not in the New York Stock Exchange. And one of the cardinal rules of the cell network is thou shalt not regress the capabilities of a cell site. And that's where we're working really hard to make sure we can provide the legacy support for the 99% of smartphones that are out there that don't support 5G today, okay? There's real world things going on. For instance, here at Inland Cellular in the United States, it was just too expensive for them to support the rural network, right? In many ways, they had to buy the same equipment that AT&T and Verizon were buying for dense urban places, but cover the expense with far fewer customers. And so Open RAN is enabling them to dramatically grow their coverage because the economics are different, okay? Vodafone, someone like Vodafone, they exemplify the big brownfield network where thou shalt not regress the capabilities of the cell site. And we're thrilled to be working very hard with them to make sure that that can be delivered, okay? In fact, I would say there are three key things that Open RAN has to achieve before we achieve the market share that was just mentioned, 30% or even more. One is that we support the ability to not regress cell sites. Two, the DUs are very expensive today, right? There's a lot, imagine using your laptop to play video games without a GPU. That's a little bit what it's like using an off-the-shelf COT server without some accelerators. And then lastly are the active antennas. Without great active antennas, O-RAN is going to go nowhere, okay? Because that's what 5G is all about. On the other hand, when O-RAN has a better active antenna than what you can get from a proprietary vendor, those numbers that were just shared about O-RAN market share are going to look small. So that's my opening piece.
Thanks a lot, Steve. And at last, I'm going to ask Oguz to shortly present. So as I mentioned, Oguz is VP R&D at Open Networking Foundation, and Open Networking Foundation has had some announcements regarding Open RAN and collaborations with Facebook Tip, I believe. So Oguz, if you can present your perspective on where we are with Open RAN and why Open RAN is an important topic for the Open Networking Foundation.
All right, perfect. So we have been talking about Open RAN, and O-RAN Alliance is sort of creating the specifications for the Open RAN. But really, at the core of Open RAN is we start with disaggregating the network. So the radio access network, as we know it in the O-RAN architecture, is being disaggregated in two dimensions. In the first dimension, the protocol stack along with the associated hardware, is being disaggregated into radio units, distributed units, and central units. In the second dimension, we have that disaggregation carry forward with the SDN paradigm. So the user plane and control plane is being disaggregated in the virtualized component that would sit in an edge cloud, namely the central unit. And there is this second true SDN disaggregation, which aims to logically centralize various aspects of the mobile link control. And for that, there is an SDN controller, ORAN calls it as the near real-time RAN intelligent controller. And on that platform, then we have these RAN control applications that ORAN calls XApps. Now, until recently, the majority of these XApps were SON-based, SON applications or policy-based configurations. But at the core of the ONF initiative that we are starting to focus on lifting in a true SDN fashion the radio resource management functions from specifically the CUC. And turn them into XApps. So in this context, the near real-time RIC will be a common platform for all tiers of RAN control in a logically centralized way. So we can view this as the RIC as the cornerstone or as the operating system for this new paradigm where the disaggregated components present various resources and the XApps control these resources following the operating system, the near real-time RIC APIs. So when we're talking about openness, we're talking about, in this disaggregated paradigm, very clearly defined interfaces that allow for multi-vendor interoperability at every level. So potentially in an RU-DU split, we should be able to talk about a multi-vendor solution thanks to these interfaces. And in the other vertical, again, thanks to the open interfaces, we should be able to talk about an XApp, a third-party XApp controlling an incumbent vendor's CU and DU. So that is at the core of openness. But in this paradigm, also, once we are disaggregating all of these, the really value add components that differentiate different vendors are sort of isolated in pockets. And there are these pockets that are really common. And in those common areas, one thing to consider is open source. Effectively, when we think of the progression of operating systems in the computing domain, that is exactly how actually operating systems came to where they are now. And the same applies in this context as well. So here, I guess at ONF, our idea is to take that Open RAN one step further. And in addition to the open interfaces that the community together is developing, identify sort of the non-differentiating common portions of this disaggregated platform and start an open source initiative around them. Thank you.
Thanks, Oguz. Thanks, Oguz. All right, so we're now going to move to the second part of our discussion, the panel itself. I'm reminding you that we have Sandro from Nokia, Oguz from the ONF, Steve from Parallel Wireless, and Bejoy from Mavenir. And myself, Patrick Lopez. I didn't introduce myself, so I'm sorry. You might be wondering why I'm doing here besides presenting and why am I actually animating this panel. I'm an analyst and a consultant at the intersection of telco and cloud. And I used to be for the last 3 years, a VP of Networks Innovation for the Telefonica Group, where I was fortunate to have teams working on what has now become Open RAN. It wasn't Open RAN at the time, and deployed some of the world's first Open RAN implementations. So I'm an analyst, but I have actually deployed and touched some of the technology we're talking about today. And I'm advising a number of carriers and operators throughout the world on how Open RAN works and the level of maturity, and I released a report on the subject. So that's it for the introductions. We're going into the panel part now. So I guess when I started thinking about Open RAN a few years ago, one of the strong driver was cost reduction, and some of you have alluded to the fact that one could expect some level of cost reduction from implementing Open RAN versus traditional RAN. So the first question is in two parts. What is that true, and what kind of ratio can we expect in terms of cost savings? Where is it coming from? From the capex, from the separation of the hardware and the software, from pure competition and the introduction of new vendors and a multi-vendor environment, or from the operation, because a lot of Open RAN is also virtualized and Cloud RAN, and you can separate the control from the data plane. So that's the first part of the question. I'll go to the second part of the question after. Who wants to jump on that?
So regarding the cost savings from Open RAN, as we speak with operators around the world, it's a box of chocolates. Everyone is different, okay? Different contextual situation. So there are cases where you can save on Open RAN today, but right now Open RAN doesn't have the volumes of the traditional vendors, right? And when you're talking complex hardware, volumes are everything, okay? What is happening though is amazing innovation that looks to take a lot of cost out over the next few years, okay? So I wouldn't say it's there right now. I think you gotta have an innovation platform before you're gonna get the cost out. And if you expect significant cost reductions on day one, you probably are gonna be disappointed, right? Now, again, it depends on the context. I see small operators that are being shaken upside down by incumbents, right? I see people that are very large operators that have significant buying power and pay a lot less, okay? So there's no one answer.
Okay, your mileage might vary. Who else want to?
Yeah, I'd like to chime in, and I couldn't agree more, right? I think that there is a pretty strong potential for cost reductions, but we have to be careful on how we present that exactly to avoid getting the customers disappointed, right? So right now, yeah, I mean, exactly as Steve pointed out, so we're not really at the stage where we can say that for every case, there is going to be a cost reduction, especially if you're really talking about building a very diverse environment, right? Because as the standard interface is still not quite there yet, there may be a cost associated with maintaining that and so on. So as we evolve, right, consolidate these interfaces, get more cases out there, and build really the critical mass behind Open RAN, then of course the cost is going to come down. So you just really got to be careful not to overhype something and manage the expectations, so we don't actually disappoint our customers and actually lose a good opportunity that we have in our hands of driving a pretty strong transformation in the market.
So if it's the promise of cost reduction, what timing are we talking about? Is that something that can be realized in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
From my point of view, it's going to be a process, right? There's not going to be like one date where we're going to say, yeah, from this day on, we're going to have a cost reduction. So it really depends on how we can activate the market and how we can actually get more deployments out there and more interfaces actually being certified and fully open. right? We do expect Open RAN really starting to pick up in more volumes in probably 2 years, but already like next year, seeing more action around it, right? And then when we get to like these 4 to 5 years timeline that I pointed out in my presentation, where we expect to have 30%, or as Steve pointed out, even more, then we're probably at that point be in a scenario where we have say competitive costs coming out of Open RAN implementations everywhere.
I think it's necessary for the radios to be better than proprietary alternatives. Once that happens, it flips, because that drives so much cost in the network. I mean, someone can spend $8,000 to $10,000 a year on the electricity on a site, right?
Yeah.
If you can drive efficiencies there that give more capacity at lower cost, that's where it's going to happen, and then it's going to flip very quickly. Prior to that happening, it's a lot harder.
Yeah, and another key point that you pointed out, Steve, is on the DU side, on the acceleration, right? So if we're able, and when we are able to evolve to a cloud native environment where we can actually utilize, besides FPGAs, but also GPUs that are widely available in public data centers, then we're talking about significant efficiencies being added into the baseband as well, which is, of course, going to contribute significantly to the overall equation.
One thing that I can add to everything that has been said is that we're talking about cost cutting with Open RAN, but there's also another angle, which is with 5G there are new use cases that are being considered.
I'm going to come to it in the second part of my question, Oguz. But right now, I just wanted to understand the perspective from a cost perspective of
okay. But I was going to tie that with the financials. So that would be a flexible, programmable, disaggregated solution would enable the same platform to start satisfying all these new business verticals, potentially creating enhanced revenues for you without necessarily adding a lot to your expenses, because in a traditional sense, for all those business verticals, you would have to purchase use case optimized solutions otherwise.
Understood.
Exactly.
Bejoy didn't have a chance to speak. So Bejoy, do you want to sound in? Sorry.
Okay. I mean, I agree with the perspectives that were given by the other panelists, especially in terms of cost realization, in terms of CapEx and OpEx, whether you can realize it right away or if it's in longer term TCO. But one angle that I want to address is also how the cost is addressed through the supply chain widening that Open RAN brings in, because now you have the better advantage of the advances in computing power. You have reduced capital and operational expenses because of the different layers which come from different players. And mixing and widening the supply chain as a result opens up the ecosystem. So where the legacy RAN networks are pretty much a closed network and leading to vendor lock-ins, our view is that with the diverse Open RAN ecosystem, you actually end up with fostering the multi-vendor environment, and it brings more openness, and there's open interface and the interoperability being key. With these two aspects, that's a major driver also for reducing the cost. I mean, how much you quantify it in terms of percentage is TBD, but that is a key driver for Open RAN as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Bejoy. All right, so here's the second part of the question. If it's the promise of cost reduction, and if really what is going to drive that cost reduction is innovation and new entrants, and the capacity to have true multi-vendor disaggregated access. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. I mean, we don't have incumbent vendor that did not have embraced Open RAN in this panel, but I would imagine that their discourse would be, listen, you don't need Open RAN to achieve that. We can provide and deliver a radio technology with processes and technology level that you trust, with capacity and performance that is the fruit of hundreds of man-years or thousands of man-years of R&D, and we will match their price, we will match their costs. What do you guys feel about that? I'm assuming that as you go into competitive situations today, it's not necessarily just between all of you Open RAN vendors, but it's traditional RAN vendors and Open RAN, and operators are asking you to justify why go and take the risk of deploying Open RAN if at the end of the day the traditional vendor might decrease their cost within an acceptable level.
Yeah, that's exactly why the discussion is not only about cost, right? So cost is just one of the angles that you take, but it is about faster innovation for sure, and it is about creating a stronger and more diverse telecom ecosystem, right, and telecom supply chain. That is actually one of the biggest drivers for governments to be so interested in Open RAN right now. It is not because they want their operators to pay less for hardware or software. That's not the angle, right? It is about making sure that there is a telecom supply chain, and especially like a 5G supply chain, that is sustainable, that is diverse, and that is dynamic, right? And that is really the angle, right? That is really the winning angle on these, especially to allow the industry and our customers as well to really justify their decision in going towards a more open environment. It is really about widening the options, have a supply chain that is more secure, and allowing countries and operators to not become totally tied or totally connected to one specific vendor, especially considering that 5G now became a geopolitical discussion besides a technology discussion, right?
Yeah, I skirted around the subject. Yes. Anyone else want to comment on this?
I would just reinforce what I said earlier, that when the open radio is better than the proprietary radio, this all flips on its head, and it will happen. It's just a matter of time.
All right. So in the meantime, before open radio gets better than traditional radio, what can we do? What are the use cases that you guys see in the field today for Open RAN deployment?
I could give the Mavenir perspective.
Yeah.
So in terms of all use cases, we're seeing enterprise use cases, new coverage for macro, the neutral host, whether it's macro, small cell neutral hosting, 5G hotspots, and mobile broadband. We're seeing use cases around all these areas, at least in initial deployments. I think one of the initial cases was some more rural areas, especially as part of the TIP initiative and the Vodafone UK initiative, where they started off in the rural areas, but now we're seeing more of the macro urban coverage use cases as well. Private network, I think, would be another key area, especially in the context of more innovation happening in that space, where you have private edge deployments. We need to bring in the packet core along with the radio, and you could also have edge applications. I mentioned earlier GPU offload and NIC offload kind of use cases. I think that's another area of innovation where the mix of vendors actually helps you realize newer use cases at a lower cost point.
I see some areas that I concur with Bejoy, and some areas that we see a little bit differently. For sure, rural implementation seemed to be one of the initial cases, also due to, in principle, less requirements in terms of highly sophisticated functionalities that are still not quite there yet, right? Another area that we see that is really interesting is around, for example, indoor coverage in big venues and areas like that, which is actually one example that I don't dare to call it Open RAN because it is an integration, but that we do have a solution that today we cover indoor stadiums in the US using a radio from another vendor, because it was a better fit than the solution that we had in-house. So we have our baseband with a radio from another vendor, from let's say an independent vendor, let's put it like that. And on the enterprise comments, I do believe that if you take the angle of the RICS, due to the capabilities that RIC brings, I'm still not fully convinced with enterprise as an initial use case, because, I mean, with the customers that we talk to, and now we have on LTE about 160 private LTE deployments, they tend to want a packaged solution because they don't want, actually they don't have people to really work on the nitty-gritty details of the wireless access network. They do not have 4G specialists there, so they tend to want a more packaged solution. Can it be an Open RAN solution that is fully packaged? For sure, right? But I don't see these guys, for example, mixing and matching a baseband unit from one vendor with a radio unit from another vendor, at least not right now. But definitely the aspect of the RIC can be a game changer for them.
I see. Anyone else want to sound off here? All right. Well, Sandro, let's continue with you. It's a question specifically for you, but I will ask everyone to comment. So Nokia has been the first, and maybe the only, traditional vendor, let's say, to adopt ORAN and to move into a disaggregated world with open interfaces. Did it hurt?
Nope. I mean, of course, it is not a decision that comes lightly, right? One can be, you know, just sitting on their glory and basically hope for the best. But it's not our DNA. I mean, we are a company with a strong history of actually self-disruption. And this is yet another case. So our reasoning behind is that, first of all, it is going to happen, right? We don't have any doubt that it's going to happen. So as it is going to happen, and also considering that we do have a pretty strong heritage of collaborating in open standards, open initiatives, for example, in core and so on. And even, I mean, you could argue that the initial steps of GSM, 2G was much more open than what it is right now. So we do have that in our DNA as well. So considering all that, it was a decision that we took with extreme confidence that we're doing the right thing, because it's going to happen and because we believe that we are well equipped to play and have a significant role in this new ecosystem.
So is the commitment of Nokia to be able to provide CU, DU, RU integrated, but also disintegrated, and that you will integrate an interface with any vendor that support open interface for each of those elements? Exactly.
So that's the idea. So our vision is that we're going to be implementing the ORAN interfaces on top of the products that do exist now, either the cloud version or the traditional version. And we will be willing to integrate with any other vendor that is also implementing these standard interfaces. One thing that we're a little bit cautious about is not trying to do point-to-point integrations everywhere with non-standard interfaces, because we believe that this can actually be a problem in the future, right? You can start creating a spaghetti of different solutions out there in the world that no one is going to be able to manage in a few years. So that's why we're so adamant on supporting the ORAN interfaces, making sure that they are properly implemented. And then with that, I mean, it's going to be a more sustainable ecosystem for everybody that is playing, you know, in the Open RAN environment.
Thank you. Bejoy, Steve, can you comment on your commitment towards Open RAN and the support of open interface between CU, DU, and RU, and effort of interoperability in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, from Mavenir perspective, we're fully committed to having open interfaces, whether it's between the RU-DU, or between the DU-CU, or from the CU to third-party rigs as well. And we're not really bound by operator push to do that. I think to the earlier comment that was made about Nokia being fully interoperable and having open interfaces, I think at least the ones that we've seen so far, there's Rakuten, there's Verizon, but it seems to be driven through an operator push. Would be really good to see the point at which the larger traditional net players who have adopted Open RAN also being fully open to bringing in and participating in PlugFest and others to make sure that some of the hindrances of mass adoption for Open RAN are actually addressed through these PlugFest as well, and the vendors themselves taking the initiative to work with third-party RRUs and third-party CU and DU vendors.
Well, we're pretty committed since it's all that we do. I would say, though, we're only in the second or third inning of what the interfaces are. There's still a lot of evolution to come, and that evolution comes when we actually try to make all this stuff work in more advanced use cases and more advanced functionality, and we realize we don't have the interface we need, and then you iterate. So, you know, saying we're committed to the process. I wouldn't say we're committed to every single interface that comes up. We want to be sure that they're the right ones, okay? Because we are all going to learn from this along the way, and which means by definition, we're going to get a lot of them wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that I see every day in my analyst and consulting job, where I try to separate a little bit the work of optimization versus the work of pioneering, and specifically the work of creation of new value versus the work of optimizing existing network and technology. These are different processes. They require different people most of the time, and different methodology. And when optimization, the risk is in planning and execution. In creation, the risk is whether innately it is possible to create new value. So I feel that Open RAN is really still in the field of creation rather than optimization. We're still at a stage where, although it is possible to deploy Open RAN in a commercial setting, and it will work under a certain condition, we're not yet at a commodity stage where you can pick and choose a vendor and plug and play without some level of work and integration. So beyond the challenges that we have listed in terms of what is missing for Open RAN to reach the end game and to become a technology as mature as traditional RAN, I'd like to ask each of you how you see in the coming years your company contributing to the ecosystem, and how you see yourself growing this opportunity. Steve, maybe you want to start?
Sure. So we're committed to the LG Open RAN. We're committed to working with other Open RAN vendors, mixing and maxing Gs. We expect that will happen with operators. That's going to be important to them. We're committed to working with innovators, pursuing the disruption in the active antenna. Okay, like my view is Open RAN is going to enable the active antenna to cost as the same or less than a passive antenna and a radio head. That's the type of disruption that's going to come from Open RAN. Those are the two big ones, as well as working with the ecosystem to drive out to make the DU work more effectively, the right accelerators, whether it's GPUs or something else.
Bejoy?
Yeah, I would echo the same comments. I think one of the areas that we would highlight is especially for massive MIMO kind of deployments, where they may be a little bit more challenged in terms of latency or interference management. This is one area where we've seen radio expertise, especially on the low-fi support to the newer and smaller radio vendors. That's one area where we would like to contribute and make sure that area is addressed, and make massive MIMO radios also a commodity in the future.
Sandro?
Yeah, so in our case, it's basically following through with the commitment that we made to the market a few months ago. for accelerating the implementation of the Open RAN interfaces in our portfolio, right? And then as we get these ready to go out, really integrating and getting engaged in more cases than what we have right now. On top of that, it is continued driving within the appropriate standard entities or alliances, like, for example, the ORAN Alliance on the work groups that we lead or the ones that we participate. So, for example, at the ORAN Alliance, we co-lead the Open Front Hall and the RIC, which, well, by no accident, are probably the two elements of the Open RAN architecture that we are more advanced right now, with no, of course, without actually letting go of the other interfaces that we're also going to deploy. So really execute on our plan, and then once we are actually with these open interfaces fully implemented, then contribute to continue advancing them with real use cases on the field.
Thank you. So, I mean, Open RAN doesn't necessarily mean open source. Open RAN is about open and disaggregated interface. Open source can be a contributor to Open RAN. Maybe Oguz, would you like to comment on your view of open source, generally speaking, and ONF contribution to Open RAN in the future?
Sure. So far we have been rightfully focusing more on the first dimension of the disaggregation, which is RU-DU CU split effectively and the open interfaces between them. And clearly, Open RAN, I think when we start hearing about the first deployments, that is going to be how the first deployments will go. But the second dimension is where, as ONF, we are focusing on, which is the true SDNization of the Open RAN through a near real-time RIC. And there, open source will definitely play a big role, because when you think about a platform like that, the controller is effectively the operating system. And that operating system, it is to the benefit for everyone to have that be open source, really. And then moving beyond that, that opens up a new dimension of interfaces. How that controller will interact on the south with all of the disaggregated RAN components, which is being defined by ORAN as the E2. But in addition, all of these innovative new XApps and how they will interact with the near real-time RIC itself. And there, again...
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you because it's hard not to jump in here. It reminds me very much of the discussions that we have had, the industry, I mean, around orchestration and what launched the creation of ONAP and open source Mano, and also the resistance from traditional vendor to integrate with an external orchestrator. I'd like to ask each of you how open or optimistic you are that you would be integrating with an external open source non-real-time RIC in an Open RAN setting.
To me, it's no different than any of the other elements in the Open RAN architecture, right? So, of course, we're developing our own near real-time RIC application. We actually announced with AT&T a pilot of that a few weeks ago, or actually more than a month ago. So we are active on that, but as we are playing an Open RAN architecture, and as we have the interface towards the near real-time RIC defined, I don't see it any different than any other integration that would come with a third-party vendor. For us, it's just a natural thing to do.
Bejoy,
from Mavenir perspective, I think it's the same. Mavenir has a homegrown MSO equivalents with an A1 interface. So as long as the external non-real-time rig can support the A1 interface, that's one first level of interoperability. Second part is the actual ML inference algorithms that are used within the SMO, the non-real-time rig. We want to ensure that that algorithm and the results of those ML algorithms can achieve the same results, and the same control loop mechanisms can be achieved if you're using any third-party SMO non-real-time rig.
How about you, Steve?
We use lots of elements of open source in what we do today. So I think it's fairly natural how this is all evolving.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I think that's all the questions that we had for today. We're about just over the time that was given to us. So I would like to thank each of the panelists for patiently answering the questions. And I would like to remind the audience that each of the panelists has a full presentation of their product offering and value proposition in the Open RAN space that will be available upon registering in the Open Networking Foundation website. And I'd like to wish everyone a nice end of day, and thanks for participating in this panel.